This is your host Shreem bin Mohammed Rafi, and here is my YouTube channel Zamir Universal. What's happening in the world? One can go back a century and see this is how I think in various forms before the Second World War started, the events were I think very easily comparable. Both world wars which we had and the world has before, right in the center of those world wars, the only mischievous nation which was you could put a finger on was the Jews living in any part of the world. And this is not anti Semitism to point a finger at a Jewish problem. And it is in my personal view that I am talking to you. I'm only conveying this to you what was in a commentary presented by Jane Gardner and very much in the press with many historians, and it's already a public statement and a document. I will only pick some of the points from that, only to compare what's happening in Gaza, a genocide, ethnic cleansing, and how cleverly the Jews have now taken the war out of Israel, their artificial state created by force by the greatest terrorist of the world, United States of America, with the help of Great Britain. And the very start of this state, the implantation was based on terrorism. The first terrorism, I think, in this whole area was Ben Gurion, and you can see how they killed the British soldiers while they were leaving. So anyone who has helped the Jews, they have stabbed them, backstabbed them. There, 100 years ago, was British soldiers and British people. And although it was the British Balfour who wrote the letter and said they could have part of Palestine with equal status for the land in which they have come to seek refuge, but then the Palestinian whose country they have come to live will have equal land, soil, all resources is divided between the two equally. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And what you see in Gaza, you will find many similarities. What I'm going to tell you about Jane Gardner's the comments and her commentary. Now, quote what she says. I used to wonder what it was about Jews that made people throughout history despise them. If they were indeed God's chosen, as I thought they had to be, the unluckiest people in the history of the world, why were they persecuted throughout history? Why had the Nazis herded them into cattle cars and taken them to extermination camps to dispose once and for all of the Jewish problem? And the word I'm using is Jewish problem and not going beyond that adjective. It's exactly this adjective used in that commentary by Jane Gardner. Now, what she says is that I suddenly recognize that if Hitler had developed a final solution to the Jewish question, that there had to have been a Jewish problem, could the Jews have in any way behaved in such a manner that would make the countries in which they resided turn against them? Or were they just unfortunate, innocent victims? Were they? And thus she goes on to say, were they just unfortunate and innocent victims? Well, but she doesn't think it was so. I set out to find answers for my questions, mainly turning to the internet, but also reading various books on the subject. What I found became increasingly disturbing to me. I had not known that throughout history the Jews had been expelled from 79 countries. Imagine, now it's not one country, it's not Germany, it's not Europe. 79 countries of the world. Some countries more than once they were expelled. I had not known that many of the claims they made about the Holocaust that I had believed unquestionably for so long were in fact fraudulent. The books I had read and the movies I had seen about the Holocaust and wept over were nothing but thinly veiled attempts to garner unwavering sympathy for the State of Israel and an excuse to extort billions of dollars from the Germany and $1.25 billion from the Swiss banks. So it was the money, and this is what is the center of all their Jewish problem is the money. And as we go along, and I personally also believe that it's the money which has, I think, brought them all these problems. Even at Gaza siege, even at this genocide, even as killing of the children and women, even the leveling the north of Gaza completely to the ground and making 2 million Gazans homeless is just part of their ambition to build high rise and develop the coastline. And already the property dealers have started to advertise the land which belonged hundreds of years to Palestinians. And in that enclave they had blockaded for 16 years. Even the animals will either die or will quit that and move to another part of the jungle. But that's what they did to another human being, and this is how the cruel these people are. I discovered that a book I had read many times as a teenager and cried about, Annie Frank's diary, had been at least partially written by someone other than Annie Frank. I learned that the confessions at the Nuremberg trials and the executions of so many Germans as war criminals were extracted under torture, and the defendants were being tried, judged, and condemned by their very accusers. I learned about the false flag operations, especially the Levon affair and the tragedy of the USS Liberty, an American ship that was attacked by the Israelis during the 1967 war, and 34 young American soldiers lost their lives. These American men and women were killed mercilessly, and many more were wounded. To add insult to injury, the Israelis claimed that it was simply an unfortunate case of mistaken identity. Something the survivors of the Liberty have always vehemently denied. They, however, were threatened with court martial if they were ever to tell their stories. I learned about the Jonathan Pollard spy case and other incidents of Israeli Jews spying against their supposed closest ally. I became shocked and horrified as I learned about the treatment of the Palestinian people in the occupied land. And please just go back and look into your own memory at how true that is, and this has been continuously going on for the last 75 years. In a land they came to seek refuge and they were given food and shelter. How they backstabbed them, look what they have done. Israelis, defense forces, and Jewish settlers continuously intimidate and kill Palestinians, women, elderly, and children. Israel purports to be the only democracy in the Middle East, but it is only a democracy for Jews. Non Jews are not even considered human beings are equal. I was saddened to see pictures of innocent Palestinian children burned beyond recognition or suffering from serious gunshot wounds after being targeted by the IDF for no other reason than that they were Palestinian children. I found out about the Jewish history of avariciousness, larceny, lying, manipulation, and their questionable and serious business practices. It's going to amaze you as I go on with the revelations she made. I learned about their roles in the radical homosexual movement, the radical feminist movement, the pornography industry, as well as their overrepresentation in the abortion industry. I discovered their role in organized crime, in the slave trade, in the civil rights movement, and in communism, an ideology that is responsible for the deaths of untold millions and the repression of many millions more. I learned that it was Jewish supremacists, just like Netanyahu and Bennett and many around them, against Christians. Now, Christianity and Christmas, they particularly targeted that. It is they who want God out of the pledge of allegiance and all symbols of Christianity removed from public life. They have driven Christianity from the public schools. Despite Christianity being the majority religion, they have taken Christmas out of the public school calendar, despite the fact that it is a statutory holiday and it is named Christmas. I read about the anti gentilism and hatefulness of the Babylonian Talmud and their utter disrespect for and hostility towards Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and Christianity and Christmas in general. And Christians living all over the world. I heard about their chutzpah in claiming that Gentile lives were worth no more than the lives of barnyard animals. Please wash my words. The one she used is not human animals, but that they considered Jewish lives to be akin to God Himself. God forbid, I hate to say these words. It is okay to steal from a Gentile or to kill a Gentile, but Jewish lives are scared and sacred. I learned of their control of the majority of wealth, the media, and academia, despite them making up less than 2% of the total population. This is even lower in Canada. They are behind the ridiculous political correctness movement and hate crime legislation that was drafted so as to silence anyone who might figure out their agenda and attempt to shed light on it. Men like German Rudolf, David Irving, and many more previously recognized as honorable and great historians were arrested, charged with hate crimes, and incarcerated simply for having made academic inquiry into a specific period of history. Other so called revisionists or Holocaust deniers have been intimidated, harassed, assaulted, and smeared simply for trying to get out at the truth. It is patently clear that the war in Iraq is due solely to Israel wanting to hobble her enemies by destabilizing their governments in order to achieve hegemony in the Middle East. It would be unthinkable for Israeli Jews to die for this cause, so they manipulated, just as now they have manipulated the United States. At that time, they manipulated the US into the war with the help of the Jewish Zionists. Israel fostered in the Bush administration in order that the blood of way too many young American men and women is shed instead. It is they who control the Middle Eastern foreign policy of the most powerful country in the world, America. It is they who control Congress, the Senate, and the puppet presidents who occupy the White House. They have such control in movies and television that are also now subject to endless programs and Hollywood movies that mock Christianity, Christian values, and degrade the traditional family values. Now, when you compare that period and compare those incidences and see what's happening right now, the stubbornness, and you see the pride of this war criminal Netanyahu and Bennett and many like them with him in the cabinet, you will see that every word this in commentary you are listening is truth. After sober reflection on what I had discovered about Jewish supremacy and Zionism, I had to abandon all my previously held notions as to the history of Jewish persecutions. What I have trouble understanding is why they continue is this behavior in whichever society they live. This is what the whole world at the moment is wondering. But at the United Nations, more than 99% voted for ceasefire. You had the America held from the throat to veto that, so that there is no United Nations Security Council for humanitarian ceasefire. So you will understand and see what the US problem is. Now, knowing that eventually they will overplay their hand and their perfidy will be exposed yet again, has history taught them nothing? Well, I'm sure it has not. Because if it would have, then why from 79 countries, all those 79 countries could be wrong, and all those majority of the world in the United Nations General Body couldn't be wrong, all in the United Nations Security Council couldn't be wrong, all now Europeans, Arabs, Asians, Russians couldn't be wrong, all asking to stop this genocide and massacre in Gaza and have a ceasefire. There's no way that you can ever defeat an ideology, and Hamas is not just an army or a resistance. That's an ideology and it's never ever going to die, no matter what you do. So when you know that you cannot win and you lost men and women, not your sons and daughters, young, which you forcibly get them in the army, and instead of going to college and having their education, marrying and having families, you had those innocent Israelis killed with little experience facing hard fighters like Hamas. And this is like making them sit like a sitting duck and have their snipers shoot them. And that's what's happening. You also couldn't care less. And that's again a Jewish problem, that you have your elderly, you have your generals, you have your women, children as a hostages. You have 130 lying there with them, and you couldn't care less. You continue to devastate Gaza, you continue to destroy their home, you continue to starve them, stop their water, and want you to kill them thirsty. Even you and your ministers recently have been suggested to send them by force. If you starve them, with thirst and no food, no medicine, and say that this is a voluntary migration to Congo, where they would just, because of thirst, there will be no water, no food, no shelter, they will die. You cannot be fooled. You'll only be fooling yourself and not the rest of the world. How come they have again shifted the war from Hamas and Israel? This is how it started. How come the whole world does not tell one single person in Israel, and that is this extremist, this son of a Adolf Hitler? In fact, he has surpassed the Hitler, and he's showing his eye and backstabbing both the British and the American President Joe Biden, who asked and gave him deadlines to stop this war on December 31st or at the most January 7th. He refused, and he is continuously bombarding and killing them. And now shift it is cleverly been able to shift this to Yemen, Houthis, Iran, Syria, even Turkish and Russian soldiers are now in Lebanon. So already from seven, there are nine countries involved in this war. And now, after first alliance, America has fallen in their trap once again and made another alliance with Australia, New Zealand, and some other European countries to go and attack. They say, we will turn you into Tora Bora if you stopped any ship taking food and ammunition or oil to Israel so that you could stop them from bombarding and killing innocent women and children. You've fallen a trap again. And it is America playing the central role and making this alliance so that if it's not a start of the Third World War, what it is. History has taught them nothing. As more and more people become aware of what is going on and who is responsible for it, anger is going to rise as it already has in the former Soviet Union and Eastern European countries. They may control television as they do, movies as they do, and the print media again as they do. But one thing they can't control is your mind. Seeing is believing. What you watch, the kids being pulled out of rubble. Even you saw this year that there was in Bethlehem, there was no Christmas celebrated. There was a baby Christ lying in the rubble, just as a symbolic protest and exposing the cruelty of the Jewish nation, that how cruel they are, the babies of Palestinians are being pulled out of the rubble. With these words, that's a Jewish problem. And also this commentary by a, I think, a very credible, very well known, very well read person. I believe that the only way is to stop Israel and not fight with Houthis or Iran or Hezbollah in Lebanon, and stop with immediate ceasefire and reconcile with, because your atrocities on one end of the scale and the October the 7th one, because you had them caged like animals, and what the Hamas did to you, it was just a bitter reminder that this is what will happen if you do this to another human being. So it is you, Mr. Netanyahu, it is you, Mr. Bennett, and the likes of you, the extremists which are now in the government, that stop and do not be again a cause of the Third World War, because believe you me, you will be expelled from Palestine forever, and that will be the end of you. That will be demise, a miserable and I think humiliating defeat which is in the waiting for you.